For this demonstration, I'm going to demonstrate a slab jar, but it will be circular. So I'm basically creating a small cylinder. It's a little bit different than building with slabs if I were to create a cube. So a cube, everything is flat. In this video, I will also be using slabs, but I'm actually going to take a slab and pick it up and curve it into my cylinder. I'm also going to demonstrate using different textures. So the texture I'm currently making is, this is like a doily, and I rolled it into my clay. So if it's something small, you can use a small roller to roll it and press it into the clay. If it's something bigger, like the one that I'm using right now, I would use an actual slab roller. So taking the roller and rolling it in. So I'm going to demonstrate that later again. But there's one piece I've already made. I've already cut out one of my circles, and now I need to cut out a second circle. I built this project around this shape. So I had created a perfect, well, the tape is a perfect circle. And so I created my slab circle to fit around the edge of that. So it should be able to sit right on top. I'm going to go ahead and pull this doily up and out so you can see what it looks like, and I wanted to do that pattern for my lid. So now I'm going to take this and set it here, kind of off-centered is the way that I'm going to cut it out. And for cutting circles, it is different. When you're cutting a straight edge, you always want to use a knife or an X-Acto knife and a ruler. For creating a circular slab, I actually would encourage you to use a pin tool. It's a lot easier to control. I can keep the pin tool straight up and down, and I'm pressing up against the tape so that my pin tool stays straight up and down. I'm not actually going through the entire clay right now. I just did a little indent. Now I'm going to push all the way through, and I'm trying to keep my pin tool straight up and down so that my cut marks will be flush and even. And then I'll pick this up, gonna make a little line and pull that off. So now I have my slab lid with that doily impression. So that's impressed texture because I pressed something in, and it's just a little bit off-centered, like I set it to the side. I could have cut out the entire design. This is just what I chose for my composition this time. Obviously, it's up to you what you decide for yours, and you don't even have to use a doily. This is just an option for texture. And now I need to cut out my really big piece. So I'm going to move these slabs. And I'm even going to move my canvas because I need to smooth my slab down a little bit more here. All right, so here's the slab. I'm going to grab my doily again, and I'm gonna set it semi-centered. Pick this side. And then I'm going to grab my rolling pin, and I'm going to roll into the clay. So I'm pressing into the clay to create that impressed texture. The harder I press, the deeper the doily will go into the clay. If I just want a light impression, I probably won't press very hard. Okay, so resuming, I have my texture in here, and I do have a little surface crack happening because of rolling it out a little bit more. I'm just going to simply try to overlap that and smooth that back out. I'm going to actually try to avoid that when I'm cutting my piece out. So I have my piece of paper, and yeah, I'm going to be able to avoid that section over there. And I definitely want to continue to use a ruler for a straight edge. I'm just going to make some light surface marks for cutting. Oops. Make sure you're pressing along your ruler so you don't do what I just did. And I can see now that my paper is not cut out very straight. So I'm actually going to adjust here and grab a longer ruler. I want my lines to be really straight. So I'm just gonna make some corner marks here so I know where I'm cutting. And thankfully it's about the length of the ruler. So I'm gonna line that up. I'm gonna make sure my cuts are nice and straight. I'm pressing up against the ruler. Now I'm going to do the full cut through. I almost always do like a practice pre-cut, then I have a nice straight line to follow. And then I want to make sure that this is lined up and parallel with the top of my jar. And my second cut, I did just cut all the way through. Felt a little bit more confident that time. And then I just have these little edges to pull out. All right. Take my piece, make sure, okay, so it's actually a little bit longer than what I originally needed, so I'm going to cut it down a little bit more. Make sure I'm getting a nice 90-degree cut. It does not look like I did that very well. And get my base out. So I have my base piece. I do have a little crack right there, so I'm going to make sure that I add a little bit of slip to that when I'm putting it together. And this is the part that's very different than if you were to build with straight slabs, flat slabs. So I am now going to take my piece and curve it into a cylinder. And then I'm going to slip and score this seam right here. And I also need to make sure that I'm attending to this crack that's forming. If you guys see that crack right there, that happened from bending it. There was already a little bit of a surface crack there. Unfortunately, that is on top of my my pattern, so I'm gonna have to just be careful while I do that. And then I want to make sure that it fits on top of my slab. So before I take all that time to do slipping and scoring, I want to make sure that, yeah, that's almost perfect. So I have a little bit I need to trim off before that's gonna fit perfect. So I'm gonna do some slipping and scoring and be right back. Okay, so now I have slip and scored my surfaces. I'm gonna flip this right onto the base, make sure I'm lining it up. Okay, so I have now secured the base on, and you can see that there is a slight overlap. So one of two options. I can either take my X-Acto knife and trim just a hair off of the slab, or I can slip and score right in between that seam and have just a little bit of an overlap with my my piece. That's completely up to the artist's choice. Sometimes that overlap just helps because you have like a nice sturdy place to actually push the two together. If you're looking for a more seamless joint, you may want to consider cutting that edge off. So I did a little bit of both. I did trim a little bit off, but I still had a little overlap to it. I do like having that overlap there. And now I'm going to actually score the inside of the vessel. If you have a texture that's overlapping where your seam is, this can get tricky because you will smooth out the texture. Hopefully whatever texture you picked, you can either replicate that, or you can somehow come up with a creative way to have the smoothness become a part of the pattern that you've put into your piece. So here I went and used my scoring brush. You can use, again, anything that would allow you to score, whether that's a scoring rib or a fork, anything that you can kind of get inside your piece and score that surface. Make sure you have some slip with it. And then I'm just going to go in with my metal rib. I'm going to support it on the outside with my hand, And from the inside, I'm just going to take a few strokes up with my rib to try to smooth out the inside of the vessel. Because again, I do want to try to get rid of that seam if at all possible. And for the most part, I was able to. The goal is not to push out the clay so much that you distort your vessel. That might happen a little bit. I think it did a little bit with mine, but hopefully nothing too intense. And now from the outside, you can see that I do still have a little bit of cleaning up to do on that seam, as well as a lot of cleaning up to do at the bottom of the vessel. Okay, so I've cleaned up my seams. I cleaned up the outside seam right here. It's now smooth. It did create a gap in between the doily pattern, but the doily pattern kind of fades in and out throughout the piece, so it doesn't really damage or take away. Because I am going for a circular vessel, I want to make sure that before I set my circular, like the top on, that I keep this piece as circular as possible. I already slip and scored the top rim and the top of the cylinder. I'm going to set that on top. And I'm just going to press around the edge for right now. I don't want to push into the middle because that will indent that slab. So I'm just pressing around the edge at the moment. And that's really all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do too much work at the moment of manipulating the top. I'm just going to kind of smooth out the edges here for a second. I'll have to do more work there anyways. And I'm going to give that some time to settle, the slip to settle. And I'm going to start to think about the outside and what I'm going to do with it. For my lid, I will want to cut some type of lid that works with the doily pattern. So I might do sort of like a pattern that kind of fades down with the movement of the doily. At this point, I'm going to be making a jar, but you could make a change holder. You know, you could cut a little slit for coins to go in, make it like a piggy bank. I could even turn this into a lantern if I wanted. I could start to, use the doily pattern and cut out different designs with my X-Acto knife, like literally cut through my vessel and create holes so that a candle could shine through. There's a lot of options with slab vessels like this. But for the sake of today's demonstration, I am going to go ahead and just make my sort of line that I'm planning on using to create a lid. So I am coming down a little bit there. I'm going to come up a little bit more. And when I'm picking my design, I want to make sure it's really clear where it's supposed to sit. So I'm actually going to create a point right there. And that'll sort of be like my clue that that's the key. That's where I always need to put my lid on when I put it on. So just double checking that I like where it's at. And now I'm going to cut it out with my X-Acto knife. I'm going to go in from the side. So I'm bending my head down so that I can really look in from the side while I insert the X-Acto knife. And I'm just going to go slow while I cut this out. There's really no hurry. I want to make sure that it looks good. I'm also using an X-Acto knife. So I'm going to slowly rotate the jar as I cut my lid off. And I'll finish this and be back. Okay, so I just finished cutting, set my X-Acto knife down, and I'm going to see if this comes off. Awesome. So as you can see, I still have a ton of score marks I need to smooth out. Even inside the vessel itself, I want to smooth that out. I don't want to mess with my cut line too much. I will go through and gently smooth it out, but if I start to rub and manipulate it and reshape it, all of a sudden I'm going to lose the integrity of what it looks like when I put the lid back on. So if you look right now, I mean, the lid fits perfectly. And that's where you want to keep it. You want to make sure that lid continues to go back on and fits perfectly. So that is a cylinder jar. Mine is big enough that I don't feel I need to add a handle to this one. Just even the way like I grab it right there, it feels like it works without a handle. Just kind of think about the function of it. If it would be easier to have a handle, I would make one and slip and score that on top of your vessel. For me, I just feel like the size of it with my hand, it just really works to be able to take it off with my hand and not have to add something else on it. If you are adding the handle, just be careful when you slip and score not to push too much on the top, because you can end up pushing your slab in, which then you have to fix later on. So the last step will just be for me to go through smoothing everything out. And as always, check every angle of your piece. You want to check the bottom, you want to check all the sides. You really want to make sure that everything has been smoothed out and it looks well crafted and not like it's just half finished and you turned it in. So that is an example of a small cylinder vessel. It's actually a little bit bigger than a small one, but there is a cylinder vessel made out of slabs.